I didn't get the usual prompt from the webinar software when we launch these clinics. So if you can see and hear me, if you'd all just use the hand icon on your control panel and just pop your hands up and let me know before I get into today's clinic. Okay, few hands going up. Okay, good. It looks like most of you can. Okay, sorry about that little hiccup. Right, welcome to today's construction clinic. It's lovely to have you all with us, especially considering that for many it's a public holiday with the Eid break at the moment. So thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to join us today. My name's Nina, I'm the General Manager at the ICCP. We've got a couple of housekeeping points to go through and a short introduction to the Institute for those who haven't heard of us before, and then we'll get into today's questions. Okay, so on your screens you have a control panel. The hand icon is there. If you have any issues with audio today, please just raise your hand and I'll drop you a message and see if I can help. If you have questions for today's clinic, you'll see a question box on your screen, so please send them through there. And please also send your question through in one complete message. It just helps me to field it across to the panelists when we get to live questions at the end. Okay, so the ICCP, what is the ICCP? Well, we are a professional members organisation and we recognise those with skills, qualifications and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. We've got 3 key objectives, and those are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained the appropriate knowledge and experience in the management and claims, and also to help and educate those who would like to gain that experience. So our membership levels, we have 3 levels of individual membership: associate member and fellow. I won't go into all the detail, but enough to say that each membership level comes with a specific set of requirements. Last year we launched 2 separate routes, Route A and Route B. One now offers a experience route. So if you don't quite meet the prerequisites for Route A, you can come in through an experience route, which has helped more people access membership over the last few months. So if you're interested, please check out the ICCP website. You'll find all the information and the specific requirements for entry up on there, as well as the benefits. So the web link's up on your screen there, and of course you can contact me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help and guide you on the membership level which would be most suitable to your experience. So today's panelists, we were, just as a side note for anybody that joined us last week, today was actually supposed to be Mark Watson again, but Mark is in the middle of an adjudication and has been called into that. So Andy Hewitt stepped in again for us this week. So same panelists as last week with Andy and Lee, but you'll be in good hands. So if you're not familiar with Andy, he's a FIDIC contracts and claims expert. He's author of a couple of well-known books, and he's also our executive officer and fellow of the ICCP. He's joined by Lee today, who's a planning and delay analysis expert, and Lee's also one of our newest steering committee members voted in the January elections this year, and also a fellow of the ICCP. So on to today's clinic, and I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to kick things off for us.
Thank you, Nina. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know if the other attendees are having the same difficulties as I am. We seem to have problems with the internet at the moment. The slides that Nina was talking about were coming on very late on my presentation, but I think that's a technical glitch rather than anything that we can blame Nina for. So our apologies for that. It's usually okay, but now it's just a case of listening to myself and Lee, so it shouldn't affect anything from now on. The first question that I'm going to take is from Matthias Murphy, and it says, for a contract that has been terminated by the employer, and the amount due at termination is in dispute and goes to arbitration under the UNICITRO rules, what is the interest rate to be applied if the FIDIC Yellow Book 1987 allows for the Bank of Contractors Residence plus 3%? So I'm assuming that's the interest rate by the central bank. Difficult question, really, because once things go to arbitration, the arbitrators would look at the issue, why the interest should be applicable, how it should be calculated. And although I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to give a definite answer to this one, because the arbitrators will make decisions based on all of the facts, I don't really see any problems if the contract says interest shall be calculated in this way or that way, in the arbitrators wanting to apply the same rules, unless there are reasons why they shouldn't do. So I hope that answers your question, Afias. Question 2 is from Sujit Dital. Under the FIDIC contract, and it's the MDB contract, the Unilateral Development Bank contract, which for those of you who don't know is very similar to the Red Book, but the development banks insist on some additional clauses such as anti-slavery, open book contract when it comes to looking at accounts, and a lot of stringent anti-corruption clauses. Otherwise, it's the Red Book. The contractor failed to complete the work on time, even after an extension of time. The contractor is working on site and has already paid the delay damages up to the maximum. The contractor has not shown any dissatisfaction on the delay damages. The work is nearly at the finishing stage and the contractor is willing to finish the works. Now, okay, not an unusual scenario, but basically is accepted that he's delayed the project, is taking it on the chin with the delay penalties, but is still continuing to complete the project. So the question is, will the contract be live, and can the contractor work on site after paying the maximum delay damage? If so, what will be the completion date as per the contract? Well, will the contract be live? Well, the contract remains live until the contractor has finished all his obligations, which I will talk about in a second. Can the contractor work on site after paying the maximum delay damages? Well, yes, is obliged to complete the works and fulfill all his obligations until they have been fulfilled. What will be the completion date as per the contract? Now, again, I think we're getting a little bit mixed up here. And if you were here last week, one of my rants was about people who don't understand the contract and don't understand how to apply it. And without wanting to point the finger, Sujit, the completion date doesn't exist under FIDIC. It's a phrase that we use quite often, but it's not a defined term. So there are two stages in completion. FIDIC defines the first stage as the date of taking over. So this is when the contract the contractor has finished his work to a point where he can hand it over to the client. There may be some minor works or snagging work or finishing works to be completed, and the client or the engineer issues a taking over certificate, and the date that is shown on that certificate is when the contractor ceases to be responsible for the safekeeping and operations of the project, and that transfers to the employer, and he can start to use the site, the project, for whatever it was designed to be. So at this point, we give the project to the employer, and that is taking over, not the completion date. The next major completion stage is after the defects notification period is finished, which is usually about 12 months. And this is when the contractors dealt with any defects that have arisen, finished off any minor outstanding works and administrative things, possibly the completion of the as-built drawings, the completion of the O&M manuals, etc. And then a certificate is issued, the practical completion, sorry, the performance certificate, and that is the point when the contractor's obligations cease. So there isn't a completion date, there's a taking over, and there is the performance certificate. So I hope that clarifies things for people. Moving on to, hang on there for Lee, and that's for Lee, to our star question asker, Simon Rowlands. Hello, Simon. FIDIC 99 Red Book, and it's concerning contractors' claims, clause 20.1. And again, for those of you who may not be familiar with FIDIC, 20.1 says the contract requires the engineer to give its response to the principles of a claim within 42 days after receiving the claim. And the options that FIDIC give are respond with approval, dear Mr. Contractor, we accept your claim, here's your extension of time, or with disapproval, dear Mr. Contractor, that's a load of rubbish, your claim is disapproved, and detailed comments. So we can't just say we disapprove your claim, we've got to say why. I think there's also a third one, which is implicit in this clause, is, dear Mr. Contractor, we accept your claim in principle, but we think you're claiming for too much. I think instead of 100 days, it should be 50 days. And instead of $10,000, it should be $9,000. Again, detailed comments, because. So that's Andy's version of that one. So going on with Simon's question, does this 42-day time frame apply if the claim is interim and subject to further interim claims at monthly intervals? Now, FIDIC says that you've got to submit your claim within 42 days of the event occurring, and let's say it's an extension of time claim. But if you can't ascertain the final effects, so on the time for completion of the delay, because the delay hasn't ended, there's been a variation, you need to get some plant or equipment, and we don't know when that's going to arrive from the manufacturers in a different country, etc., etc. So FIDIC says that you need to put an interim claim in and then follow that up at 28-day intervals with the latest information. So your initial claim will be, we're going to be delayed, we think it will be till the 1st of June, and then a month later you get some more information from the factory, maybe they've booked it in for manufacture, so we think it might be to the 1st of July, and then once it's on a ship we can predict how long it's going to take to get to site and get fixed. So it may be the final effects of the claim could be the 1st of August. So they get into the question, how best should the engineer respond to an interim claim that is continuing to evolve? For example, wait for it, COVID-19. We are working on several projects where we're working on behalf of the contractor, where we are preparing extension of time claims. These have to be interim because we still don't know when the delays are going to end. Well, going back to FIDIC, clause 20.1, FIDIC doesn't make any difference between responding to a final claim or an interim claim. So you need to follow the same advice, whether it's an interim or a final claim. So respond to the principles. Yes, COVID-19 exists. Yes, we understand that it's delaying the project. Yes, it is a claimable event under subclause 8.4. I can't remember the subparagraph. So in principle, we approve your claim. We've had a look at your delay analysis. It's only an interim calculation, but we're sort of happy with what you're predicting in this one. So yes, we can give you an extension of time until whatever. And the important thing is the engineer should be awarding interim extensions of time as and when the claims come in. If it can tick all the boxes and say, yes, the contract is entitled, yes, it's a reasonable prediction of the effects, yes, yes, yes. Or he might go back and say, we've got your interim extension of time, but in this particular contract, for COVID-19 is not an event that gives you entitlement to claim. Your claim is therefore disapproved. So I hope that answers your question, Simon. If in FIDIC, the engineer needs to respond to each and every claim submission, and in this case, it doesn't really need to be an absolutely detailed response, I don't think, until you get the final claim, and then you get down to the nitty-gritty of dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the delay analysis, which will demonstrate the amount of the extension of time. So that's it for me. I hope that's helped people. So I'm going to hand over to Lee.
Thanks, Andy. Afternoon, everybody. Okay, I've got a belter of a question for the first one. It's from Steve Bowman. And the question is, I was recently invited to bid for an expert appointment along with a delay analyst. The expert report will eventually be used in adjudication, arbitration at a later date. The background is as follows. The engineer approved the baseline program, but it wasn't linked, nor did it show a critical path. The engineer had approved an EOT based on an impacted as planned delay analysis. During private discussions, the expert delay analyst stated that we should protect the engineer and not alienate him, and that we should look to be reasonable and find a solution to support the EOT and support what we believe to be a reasonable EOT for the contractor. The third question is the interesting one, but we'll start off with the first one. It finally says, with an expert's hat on, what is the panel's thoughts about this scenario, particularly point 3? Right. I have worked on arbitration where the contractor did not submit a critical path program. It wasn't linked. It was literally just a static bar chart on a piece of paper, and yet it got to arbitration. So it does happen. It obviously makes the claimant's job a lot harder trying to prove an extension of time, trying to prove that he is entitled to anything. And then as the respondent side, it's also equally difficult because you're there to provide the arbitration an answer. So is there any time? So then you've got to go through all the facts and all the records that are available and see if you could actually look at putting a time together. Point 2, which was that the engineer actually gave an extension of time using an impacted as planned. Well, the first question is, which program did he use? Because the baseline that's approved has no logic in it. So that bit is missing from the details. But looking at that, the engineer could well have approved and given an extension of time using an impacted as planned if he believed that the initial phase of the project was delayed and that no works could start, and so therefore the entire period would be shifted. So that would be an impacted as planned, and that would be reasonable because no works have been carried out, so we don't need any progress. There's no progress updates, and it's the initial delay. So that could have happened. However, if the impacted as planned has been awarded throughout the project, say 6 months, 8 months into the contract, and lots of progress has happened, then it's pretty unlikely that that extension of time would be correct. Point 3, and I'll just repeat that one because during private discussion, the expert delay analyst stated that we should protect the engineer and not alienate him, and that we should look to be reasonable and find a solution to support the EOT we believe to be a reasonable EOT for the contractor. Steve, I know of you, so you will definitely know the answer to this, but it is the expert's role is to assist the proceedings and the tribunal, the arbitrators. That's the expert's role. It's not to win the case. It's to provide independent review, evidence, expert advice to the tribunal for them to decide what they're going to award. You can be persuasive on your argument if you believe what you're saying, and you should believe what you're saying because you're the expert. So you provide your case based on the facts you've been given, not to avoid alienating anyone. That's not your role. Your role is to provide a report on the facts and tell the story. So you shouldn't. If I was in that situation, I would have probably declined the case or advised my instructing solicitor of what was being said, because it's not right. You're there to provide advice to the tribunal, or whatever situation you're in, mediation. So that would be my answer to those. My next question, again, another belter of a question. Peter Jones. I know that proving disruption claims is more difficult to prove than other types of claims, and the two methods generally used are the measured mile analysis and the earned value analysis. What is the speaker's view on this subject? Disruption. It is a difficult one. Disruption comes from productivity. Productivity comes from your planned tasks, how long you're going to take. And that is the million-dollar question, especially, say, for in the Middle East, when you import a lot of labor from all over the world. The production rate for them, if you're an international company and you set up in the Middle East and you've got a set production rates and you adjust those production rates, you've got to adjust them based on the conditions, the experience of the labor, and then put that into play to produce your program. 9 times out of 10, that never happens. It's a common production rate that was used on the last job, and we use it on this one. Did it work on the last job? Don't know. Were we late? Well, we were late, but that was the client's fault. It wasn't our fault. But we're going to use the same production rate. So there lies a fundamental problem in your production rates. The next difficult part is actually keeping records. I've seen very few, and probably 1% of the projects I've ever worked on, with detailed records. Detailed records in the sense of, we planned to have 4 men on this, we had 6 men on it, or we had 3 men on it on the first day and we had 5 men on the rest of the period. I've never seen those records per task. I've seen numbers of men on a site, I've seen number of men on a floor, I've seen number of duct workers, I've seen number of still fixers. Not, I had 4 still fixers on that slab. So that record is very scarce on a project, and that will help you in disruption. So if we then look at, you've mentioned earned value and measured mile. Earned value is becoming more and more. People like to use earned value, but what I've yet to see with earned value is the actuals. So we know what the budget cost was, and we know what the budget value was and what we should have earned by a set period, and we know what we actually earned after a period. So they may not be the same periods, and one may say in 10 days work we'll earn X amount, but it took us 20 days to earn that money. What was the actual cost to do that work? What was the actual cost of the labor on that particular task? So I've not seen that in many of the earned value analysis that are banded around. So that again comes down to you need those records. The measured mile approach is a much common phrase. Everyone in the construction industry has heard of measured mile. Probably not many people have done it, have actually carried out and executed the measured mile. They'll say, we plan to do 10 days, it took us 20 days. Okay, so what? Show me the proof that your production, that you could have A, done your 10 days, production-wise, and then why it took you 20. But those records are not there. And did you use the same number of men when you took 20 days or not? So the measured mile is a lot easier to convince people because they understand what you're saying, but the records to support it are extremely difficult to get hold of. A quick example, if we've got a 5-day activity and it takes us 10 days, on a program, if you looked at an as plan, as built, 5 days plan, 10 days, there's 5 days delay. It may be critical, maybe non-critical. So let's say it's non-critical, it's just pure disruption. Those extra 5 days, if we'd had the actual records, it would have showed that we did the work in 4 days. We started the first day, we demobilized the men because it was a critical activity we had to get on. And then we put the men back on there after 6 days and finished the work off in 3. So it took us 4 out of a planned 5, but we took overall 10 days to do it. So is that disruption? We've disrupted the works, but we're not claiming any disruption. We did a better productivity. Or it could have taken you 8 days to do that 5 days work in a 10-day period because you were stopped for 2 days. So without the records, there are so many different combinations on what actually happened. So any disruption, you need those records. And I strongly believe that on most projects, there's a vast amount of money lost through disruption because it's not measured. If on a project, there's not a delay on the critical path, people tend to ignore it. But there's money there. And the SEL protocol is delay and disruption. So it's there in the title of the document, disruption. There's a huge cost there. It means you've got to man up to measure and record exactly what you're doing. So they're the two for me, and I think we're almost out of time. So there were the 2 questions from me. Nina, have you got anything coming in?
Thanks, Lee. We haven't got any questions through at the moment, but we've got a couple minutes left. So by all means, if anybody does have any questions for Andy or Lee, feel free to send them through the question box. In the meantime, for anybody interested or who's not attended any of the previous clinics, just to let you know that all of the recordings are up on the ICCP website. You'll see a webinars tab on the homepage. So I think this is the 10th session now. So all of those recordings are up there if you have time and would like to go and listen back. We've also got the public series, which we did. Those were more in-depth, hour-long sessions and presentation-based rather than the informal nature of the clinics. So if you'd like to check out those, please do. Okay. Okay, I think we've got another question there from Declan Scully. That should be on the list. If we can just have a quick look.
Yeah. Andy, do you want to do this one on prolongation costs?
I actually saw planning and delay and thought, well, that's one for Lee. And Lee obviously saw prolongation costs and thought that's one for Andy. So I think given the time, Declan, our apologies. Let's defer this one until next time, because I've not looked at it in any form of detail, and it sounds as though Lee hasn't either. So our apologies, but we will hang it over until the next clinic.
Yeah, Declan, I do apologize. Anytime I see cost, I just turn off. I'm a pictures man. So, yeah.
Okay, in that case then, it's 4:30 on the nose, so we'll wrap things up for today. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. For anybody who's still enjoying the Eid public holiday, I hope you've had a lovely time. And if you have any questions for myself about membership, please do get in touch. And of course, get in touch with Andy or Lee at any time. We'd love to hear from you. And just to let you know as well, we're continuing on the construction clinics. We're just confirming the schedule of panelists for June. So normally we send out the link to register for next week in the follow-up email. You won't get that today, but look out in your inboxes, and on our LinkedIn page we'll be announcing the panelists and the registration details. So that's it from us. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Thanks. Bye.